So today's session is all about feedback. I think it's a very, very important topic. It really is one of the main ways that we connect and communicate with our learners in courses. And so if we spend some time thinking about how we do that and putting some deliberate strategies in place, we can make that feedback even better. So what we're going to cover today is some examples of feedback. We're going to look at some possible models that we might be able to use for giving feedback. Think about the reasons we give it, that we give feedback and what we actually want to achieve out of that. Sometimes answering that question can really help us to target our feedback and to choose the right channel to actually deliver it. We're going to look at some general principles of giving good feedback, because sometimes we can get a little bit bogged down in all these models and frameworks and things like that. And maybe it's just worthwhile having a look at what does good feedback look like, and some good examples as well, and how we can actually give that feedback. And maybe the way we choose to do it might be different depending on what we're trying to achieve. We're going to finish off with an exploration of some biases and negative influences we might need to be aware of when giving feedback as well. So I'd like to start with some interaction. So I'll get you to use the chat box for this. I'm on my own today, so it's going to be very difficult for me to keep up with all of the chat that's going on. But I'm just going to pick and choose a few bits and pieces from what you say in the chat box. So let's look at these examples here. I see these a lot, very, very common. And I must say I'm a little guilty of some of these things myself. Good job. Nice work. Satisfactory. Please fix and resubmit. Is that good feedback? Why or why not? Okay, it's not good feedback, not specific. The student will get nothing from it. It's not specific enough. It's vague. It's not personal. It's not constructive. Needs clarity. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so you can see in the chat there, I think everyone's on the same page, that these examples are possibly not the best examples of good feedback. Let's try another one. Maxine, I'm repeatedly saddened and disappointed by your lack of effort. Come on, this is diploma level. If you can't put together a decent submission for this, you may as well not bother. I refuse to mark any more of this rubbish. Shape up or ship out. Now, this example is certainly more detailed than the previous ones. What do you think? Okay. Oh yeah. So this one's getting some pretty harsh comments. Yeah. Wow, rude, negative, lack of effort, not constructive, almost bullying, very negative, disheartening for the student. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for your feedback on that feedback. And looks like from those comments, you definitely hit the mark there. What about this one then? So the last one was quite negative. Let's look at this one. Oh my God, Philip, that was incredible. You've done amazingly. I'm so impressed. You're a natural. You know that, don't you? Have you done this before? Anyway, I can't tell you enough how impressed I am by your efforts. Keep up the great work. What about this example? What's your reaction to that? Okay, bit over the top, Kylie, you think? Yep. A few comments on over the top. It's a bit much. Too casual, feels patronizing. Too much positive and no details. It doesn't really say why it was good. It's nice, says Wayland, but doesn't really explain the student's knowledge. A bit unprofessional. Wants a dinner date, a bit cringy. Okay. So a couple of people didn't mind it. I mean, I think to be on the receiving end of this feedback, you might feel pretty pumped up by the feedback that was given. It's maybe confidence boosting, but that's good. Okay, so it's got some discussion flowing, which is good. And what about this one here? This one might have a bit of a familiar format to it. Your presentation started off strong. I was hooked at first, but then I felt my interest waning and was quite frankly bored. But overall, you met the requirements of the task. Great job. What about this one? Okay, so still not great. The sandwich. So someone has done very well to identify this one's known as the feedback sandwich, a very poor implementation of the feedback sandwich, but nevertheless, there it is. You've got your praise, some not really improvement, but just some things in there that they didn't do well, and then some praise at the end. So this is something we've got to watch out for with these models of feedback, and we'll go into this in just a moment and some other models later. But the feedback sandwich can be misused, just like in this example here. So anyway, I just thought we'd start off by some of those just to sort of set the scene here and look at some extreme situations of perhaps poor feedback. And now we can leave those behind and start to look at some more positive things. So the feedback sandwich, I think it's good. If you're not aware of the feedback sandwich, and I'm not going to say the word, but some people refer to it as another type of sandwich. It's the acronym is PIP, praise, improvement, praise. And I think it's a little bit like the humble Devon sandwich. It's quick and tasty, but a bit bland, predictable, processed, ultimately unsatisfying and kind of bad for you. So I think with this sort of model, it's good, but it becomes very predictable. People start to maybe ignore the important things in the middle, even if it's been well constructed, and can just become a little bit too predictable. So it's good to have a model, and I think if you're starting out, especially if you're helping other people, in courses like the TAE, like what we do, we often like to give people some models to start out with. When you're just learning to give feedback, it can be helpful to have something nice and simple like this. But I think we can go beyond this simple model and start to look at what does it actually mean? What's the important parts of feedback? So here's another model that I think is really helpful. It's called the STAR model. It's not just used for feedback, it's used in storytelling and even used in job interviews and things like that. The STAR model stands for situation, task, action, and result. So it's a way of formulating specific, actionable feedback that's linked to observable behaviors and outcomes. So for each of these points, you describe the situation. So that's the setting where the behavior occurred, or what they did in the task, or what their assignment was, for example. The task or objective that they were working towards, so what they needed to actually achieve, the actions or behaviors that you observed, and then the impact or outcome of those actions. So I'll show you an example of the STAR model in action. So this is a way of moving beyond the PIP sandwich, the feedback sandwich. During your presentation on beekeeping, that's the situation, your goal was to explain common bee behavior. It's the task. You used clear visuals and spoke confidently, action, which helped the audience understand the key points and generated several questions during the Q&A. That was the result. So you can see you can use this thing to start to formulate how you might put together your feedback to students. Now, it's not going to work in every situation, but if you're looking for a bit of a framework, that can be quite helpful. If you really like frameworks and a bit of structure to the way you do your feedbacks, here's some other models you can look into. I haven't gone into details on these because I just wanted to focus on, I guess, the more important things. But do some Google research on these. There's Pendleton's feedback model. So if you look into Pendleton's feedback model, it's really good at helping you break down barriers to feedback. So it's particularly helpful if, probably more so in a management context, if you have staff who maybe aren't so open to feedback, who are a little bit resistant, the Pendleton's model can be really helpful in getting, breaking through those barriers. Same with these other three that are here, the SBI, which is situation, behavior, impact, quite similar to the STAR model, and AID, action, impact, and desired outcome. So do some research on those. And the 360-degree feedback, that's a way of not just teacher-student type of feedback, but also considering other people. So in a management context, they typically look at feedback from your peers, feedback from other staff, from other managers, and even subordinates. In a teaching context, you might look at peer feedback as being part of that. So just some other sort of jump-off points for you to go and have a look at if you want to go and see some other models that are out there. There's probably other things too. If you do know of another model or strategy, please include it in the chat as well. That can be really helpful. Tonya's mentioned that you're familiar with this and it's used for interview responses. You must be talking about the STAR model. I think that's where I've seen it a lot. So I think it's really useful to think about, before we start giving feedback, to think about what we're actually trying to achieve out of it. So sometimes it just happens kind of naturally. We're not really thinking about, well, what's the outcome that I want from this? What thing do I want my student to do as a result of having received my feedback? So I've kind of categorized them here. A lot of us, as people in the vet system, we're doing a lot of summative assessment. So that is the weighing up of whether someone has met the requirements in a unit of competency or not, whether they're competent. So the final proper assessment. And so the outcome we might want from our feedback in a summative assessment is we want a student to demonstrate competency after an unsuccessful attempt. So they've submitted some work, done a project or answered some questions, or maybe you've observed them performing a task, but they didn't meet the requirements. So you might need to give feedback that helps equip them with what they need to be successful so they can have another go at it. Sometimes it might be a summative assessment where they've completed the task and they've met all the criteria and you're giving them feedback to confirm that, yes, you've had a successful outcome. You still might add some details and point out the things they've done well and give them some additional things to improve on for the future. But the result is that, yes, I want you to know that you were successful, and we can now move on to other units or other things. There's another type of assessment that we're probably all quite familiar with, which is formative assessment. So the word formative comes from the word formation, the formation of skills and knowledge. So it's basically a way of, it's a learning strategy, really. It's a way of, when we're teaching people, to check to see if learning has happened. And so good teachers do this frequently. They're observing, they're deliberately putting things in their training sessions to check to see if the learners are forming the understanding and are developing the skills effectively. So part of that will be giving feedback. We might need to provide corrections. We might need to help them improve their skills. We might need to provide suggestions on questions that they've answered incorrectly and where to find further information. So this can be a lot more varied in the way that we do formative assessment. And also removal of scaffolds. So part of teaching is we typically start with lots and lots of supports in place, and our students have lots of examples to work off, and they're getting lots of guidance and lots of instruction. And then as their skills and knowledge improve, we need to start pulling away those supports. And as part of that process, we might be giving feedback to let them know that, hey, I'm actually going to be removing some of the supports in place here, and you're going to be more on your own. And you might need to build their confidence and say, hey, you've got this. You performed really well with support. Let's see how you go when we start to pull some of that support away. In general, our objective for giving feedback might be just to build confidence. So that confidence can be a big issue in learning as well. So we might not really have any other objective other than to make that learner feel like they're doing well, or if they're feeling a little discouraged, help encourage them and get them coming back. It could be part of encouraging participation and building engagement in the course. You know, feeling motivated and pumped up by your trainer can be a huge factor in how engaged someone is. And also, this point on confidence or just giving feedback anyway is a really important part of core skills support. So when we look at those LLN units in the TAE, one of the things that we often talk about as one of the main strategies for supporting someone with their core skills is frequent feedback. Someone who needs additional support as part of their learning pathway is going to need lots of feedback on what they're doing well and feedback on how to improve. So getting clear on this, on your intentions, on the outcome that you want from it, will really help you tailor the message and choose the right delivery method. So here's some ways of delivering feedback. I don't think any of these are a particular surprise to you. I always think the ultimate is giving is face-to-face feedback. And I love when we have our face-to-face courses and our workshops and we get to sit down. I often do like a feedback session. We sit down with the learners one-on-one after a performance. Usually it's after they've maybe done some training delivery or maybe one-on-one tuition. And then afterwards we get to sit down face-to-face and often write pages and pages of really rough hand notes on my observations. But then I get to sit down and really look the learner in the eye and say, hey, these are the things that I saw in your performance that were really great, and this is why, and this is how it'll help you. Here are some things that I noticed that you were maybe challenged with or that you could improve on to really enhance your performance. Here's what you need to do to improve for next time. I love doing that face-to-face, and I find that for learners who maybe haven't met the requirements or need a lot of improvement, being able to look them in the eye and deliver that feedback personally one-on-one is really quite powerful. And I find that particularly learners who need that additional work and who do have points for improvement or constructive feedback, they take it so much better when you're doing it face-to-face. So the next point there is written. So that's a common method that we use, especially if we're doing online stuff. We'll write out the feedback and deliver it as an email or a comment in our learning management system, or a form as on a workbook or something like that. It's pretty good, and it can be quite useful, especially for really technical things. If you've got like a project or something that's got a lot of technical specifications, then it can be really good because it gives them a reference point to go back to. So written feedback is good. But I do find that in the example I gave before, when you do need to actually tell a learner that they need to do it again, that they need to improve their performance in some way and then redo it or something like that, often in a written format, it can be taken quite personally. And it can be quite time consuming writing it out and trying to think about a way to deliver it in a way that doesn't get kind of misconstrued or taken the wrong way. So that third point there, I would really like to, for anyone who's in the boat of delivering online training, where you don't get to meet your learners face-to-face or you don't have that opportunity of giving it face-to-face, there's no excuse these days not to be using video. So some learning management systems have video feedback tools built into them. But if not, jumping on a Zoom call or Teams or whatever you like to use, or using a tool like loom.com, Loom.com. It's a really fantastic video tool. There's free plans. They're probably limited in timing and that sort of stuff. I think they have a discounted educators plan as well. But since Loom has popped up over the last few years, there's definitely been some competitors as well. So what it is, it's a tool that's basically can either run in your browser or on your computer. and you can show your screen, and it puts you in a little bubble, in a little circle, so it can actually see your face and your gestures and your smiles. And you can talk through an assignment and show them things that they've done well and things they need to improve, or, if it was a video or a live performance or something like that, you can actually, visually show them. But either way, getting your face on the screen and being able to deliver that feedback can really, especially if it's constructive and they need to do it again, can really break down some of those barriers where, they might take it personally, because they know, they can really see that you're not out to get them. You don't want to tear them down. You don't want them to drop out of the course. You're a trainer. You want them to succeed. You want them to do their best. And so that way they can really see you. I really love these video tools for feedback. I like to use them as much as possible. And I find by the time I've written out a lengthy bit of written feedback, it's probably taken about 3 times as long as it would for me to jump on a video and record it. And I can tell you, and I've done this a lot, people don't care about how messy your hair is or anything like that. They just love that you've made the time to jump on the camera and deliver that feedback and try and make that personal effort. Here's some other strategies or methods of giving feedback. So there's peer, this sort of goes beyond the actual medium that's used to deliver it, and more of a strategy, but peer feedback can be really good. So I love when we have workshops where people do, practice doing training sessions and one-on-one, they get feedback, not just from the trainer of what the trainer's observed, but hey, you were role-playing the student for that person. What was your experience of being their student? Or other students who were in the room? What did you think of their performance? And getting that from multiple sources, a bit like that 360 feedback model. It can be a really fantastic source of feedback for their improvement and ongoing development and building of their confidence as well. Self-reflection and self-assessment is also really, really effective. Often things, especially when it's performance-based, like the performance of a skill, self-reflection and self-assessment is usually people know. I know from my experience, and our learners will often find this as well, that you'll know before anyone else where you need to improve. And in fact, sometimes the issue with the self-reflection is that they become too harsh of a critic on themselves. So when we use that self-assessment or self-reflection method, I think it should be coupled with, the trainers or assessors' feedback as well, to kind of balance it out a little bit. Say, hey, back off a little bit on yourself. You probably didn't go as badly as you might have thought. Here's some things that I saw that were amazing. So just use that cautiously, but it can be a really effective way of gaining feedback. Anonymous feedback can be helpful. Again, used with caution. I think unmoderated anonymous feedback can be quite difficult. That can open up possibilities for people to be abusive. But when it's done well, and if it's moderated and has some oversight from the trainer, it can be a really good way of getting that very honest feedback. And then, of course, real-time feedback. And what I mean by that is, so sometimes we allow a performance to happen, and then at the end of it, we give feedback. Sometimes it's appropriate to give feedback during the performance, minor corrections and things like that. So I'll just highlight that these last 4 here are not really suitable for summative assessment. There's probably examples of where it's totally fine for summative assessment. So that is, the competency-based assessment. These last 4 here, I think, are really good for formative assessment, when people are in the classroom, when they're not being formally assessed against a competency, but they're developing their skills, they're developing their knowledge, they're still learning, basically. These things can be really helpful for that. Just for example, the real-time assessment. Now, we're taught as competency-based assessors in our VET system, we're taught that we shouldn't be intervening or interfering during the assessment process, that it needs to be a genuine performance. So real-time assessment in that setting could compromise the integrity of the assessment. I think I might have just jumped in on that one there, Jania. I'm just looking at having a look at the chat here. I'm sorry I don't have time to get to everyone's questions, but I just noticed your question. Is it okay to provide feedback during an assessment? Yeah, so I think feedback during an assessment can compromise the integrity of it. I think it depends on the assessment, depends on the competency being assessed, but I'd say anything sort of that's got a risk factor that really does need the student to demonstrate independent performance, because you think about what they're going to be like on the job. That probably helps you answer that question, is what's it going to look like when that student graduates from your course and now has the certificate and they start using that skill out there in the workplace? Are they going to have someone giving them frequent feedback and supervision? You know, if it's a heavily supervised role, then maybe it's appropriate, because you're giving feedback is going to replicate the conditions of the workplace. And yeah, Scott, that's really good, Scott. Thank you for backing that up. A couple of other people have mentioned that as well. Sean, you've mentioned that feedback can also be a merger of videos or actions needed to be fixed, written instructions. So a combination, absolutely, yeah. I think a combination of these things are really good as well. I remember I used to get really confused between the definitions of subjective and objective. So I just thought, just for anyone else who might have been a little bit caught up on that, here's just some ways of getting clear on the differences. So the term subjective, when we say, oh, gee, that feedback was very subjective, it means sometimes we use the term subject to refer to the person giving the feedback. So when it's subjective, it's based on me as the observer, my personal feelings or opinion. And so subjective feedback is rarely useful for vocational learners. So there probably are some circumstances where your personal opinion, like if you're providing more of a mentorship arrangement where you really are the expert, you're providing that guidance and mentorship, you know, maybe a bit of subjectivity is okay, but in most cases not. So if we're talking about pure competency-based assessment, well, what is competency-based assessment? It's someone achieving an objective, isn't it? So I think that term objective is very spot on there. It's feedback that's based purely on the facts that are being observed. So what we're aiming for here is objective feedback. So how do we do objective feedback? We compare the product or performance of the student against criteria. You typically find when we're doing assessments that they fall into those two broad categories. It's either a product, so something they've created, might be a physical product like a piece of furniture or a report or a spreadsheet or a written assignment, but it's the product of their work, or it might be performance. So we're actually observing them do a thing, a dance move, slicing food, you know, in the kitchen. It could be a presentation or something like that. So we're watching them do something. So we're comparing that against the criteria, against what's from the unit of competency or what's given to us in our assessment instruments. And when we're giving objective feedback, we comment on the ways that the product or performance either meets or doesn't meet the criteria. We don't really have much else to add. I mean, you can sort of add a few little flourishes of additional things on there. You know, if you've got really, really excellent performance, you might like to give them some additional things that they could, you know, go beyond just meeting the criteria. But I think our job as assessors really is to look at the criteria, look at the performance of the product, match the two up, and make some commentary on that that's useful. And that final point there, communicate appropriately on what the candidate will need to do to meet the criteria. And I've just highlighted that because we've got to be careful with our feedback not to go too far, remembering, especially in a summative assessment, you know, when we're actually formally determining whether they're competent or not, it's kind of extension on our discussion before, that we're not giving answers or compromising the integrity of the assessment by giving them too much information so that it's making it unfair. So just you'll need to judge that based on what units that you're teaching and assessing. It's not for me to say. So we had some frameworks and things before, and like I said, frameworks are really good if you're looking for a starting point or a way of developing a habit around your feedback. But I think it's just so important to remember we're actually talking to another human being. So frameworks and models, they tend to get too mechanical, repetitive, and you kind of miss out on the human element. I just find every single assessment that I get involved with and I'm giving feedback on, there's always these dynamics that you just can't predict. It might be really outstanding performance, or it might be these nuances or external factors that you couldn't have predicted, things that just fall outside a framework. So rather than giving you another formula, I thought, why don't we just look at the general principles, the general characteristics that regardless of the mechanism that you use, the way you deliver it, whether it's video or written or personal, whatever, these are some things that if we build them into our feedback where appropriate, then we're probably heading in the right direction. So I like to start off any feedback by thanking and acknowledging their time and effort. This is really, I mean, for me as a learner, I find that really important. You think about the work that your students do, they've often poured their heart and their soul into this stuff. You know, for them to have been working on something for months or weeks or whatever, you know, putting hours and hours and hours of work into something, and then for you to turn around and go, yeah, great job. It just doesn't really cut it. So I think starting off with a thank you and an acknowledgement for all the work they've done is really nice, a really nice way to kick it off. You don't have to do it in this order, by the way. There's again, it's not necessarily a structure or a framework, but it's just some good practice principles. I think it's good, where appropriate, to invite reflection. So that might be asking them how they think they went. What do they think they did well, or where do they think they could improve? Putting that on earlier on can be really helpful. At point 3 there, I think it's great to highlight strengths. Point out the things that were done well objectively. We know that word, objectively, in relation to the criteria, what was done well. At number 4, we want to point out some improvement. So again, explaining objectively where performance, maybe it met the criteria, but could still improve for future work. 5 is development. So maybe explaining where performance didn't meet the criteria. So that's particularly important in competency-based assessment, and especially when they need to make another attempt. We've got to explain very objectively, very clearly where performance didn't meet the criteria and why. I think then at the end, it's good to encourage them to, especially if you've had some improvement or development points in there, build their confidence, offer them actionable strategies for improvement, tell them, you know, try and build that feeling that with another attempt or with continued efforts, they're gonna do well. And then at the end, it's great to invite some questions or any clarification. So just to bring this to life a little bit, I've just got a couple of examples to kind of dissect this model, just so you can see how it might be done. But I mean, you're all experienced educators. You probably know this anyway, but let's have a look. So I've got an example here of a reverse parallel parking assessment. And I've broken it down to those points that I had on the previous page. So we're starting off with a thank you, an acknowledgement, inviting reflection, and highlighting strengths. So they might say, hey, thanks for your efforts demonstrating your reverse parallel park. It can be a tricky maneuver. How did you feel about your attempts? What felt the most challenging? We've invited some reflection. You did well to observe your surroundings and check your mirrors throughout the maneuver. You also controlled the speed of your vehicle, ensuring a safe and smooth reverse. Okay, so they've highlighted some strengths. We've got here some points for improvement and development. You completed the park after 3 attempts. Your initial positioning could be improved. Starting slightly further away from the parked car would give you more room to maneuver and adjust your angle. Your steering input needs further development. You're turning the wheel a little too early, causing you to come too close to the curb. Practicing the timing of your steering inputs will help you achieve a more centered position within the parking space. And then we're finishing off with some encouragement, inviting some questions. Look at the results of this final park. The vehicle is in an excellent position. You can clearly do this well. Practice in different locations with varying sizes of parking spaces. Consider using reference points on your car like the rearview mirror to help you judge your distance from the curb and other cars. Do you have any questions about the feedback? Would you like me to demonstrate anything? Okay, so there's those good practice points in action. Let's look at another example, but I won't point out the things, the points. You can see them for yourself. This is slicing carrots. I know nothing about slicing carrots, so I hope I've done this justice. Thank you for demonstrating your knife skills with the carrot. I appreciate you taking the time to practice this essential technique. How do you feel about your attempt at slicing the carrot? What aspects do you think could be improved? You maintained a safe grip on the knife and demonstrated good awareness of your surroundings. Your initial cuts were relatively consistent in thickness, but they became less uniform as you progressed. The main area for you to practice is the consistency of your cuts. Notice how some slices are much thicker than others. A few are not completely severed from the carrot here too. This appears to be because of inconsistent pressure. Focus on maintaining even pressure with your guiding hand using a smooth motion with the knife. Practice with slower, deliberate cuts at first, gradually increasing your speed as you gain confidence and control. Do you have any questions about the feedback, or would you like me to demonstrate the proper technique again? So I think we're moving in the right direction now. To finish off our session today, I wanted to get your input on one more thing, and that's some biases and negative influences. I think when we're giving feedback, especially when we're on a big day, a big assessment day, maybe we're a bit behind on our marking and we've got to get through a lot of things, and we can sometimes forget that there are external pressures that change the way or affect the quality of our feedback. So I'd love your input in the chat. What are some things that you can think of that might affect the quality of your feedback? Time availability. I've marked a heap of not yet competent assessments and I'm tired. Our own experience and expectations. That's a great one, Craig. And I was going to share a few on the next page here, and I didn't think of that one, but that's that curse of knowledge. We forget what it's like to be a novice or to be just learning this stuff. And that experience and expectations can put us maybe beyond what the standard is. Really good. And you've mentioned fatigue as well. Comparisons with other students, excellent. The efforts by the student, I think, is a great one. Aaron, thanks for that. Sometimes we might feel, gee, they really didn't put a lot of effort into this one. Oh, maybe it's gone the other way. Perceptions, Liz, thank you. Shivani, your mood, absolutely. Dania, anti-bias, yes. Personal taste. If they're getting it consistently wrong. Too many candidates, not enough time, Catherine, thank you. Time constraints, there's been a few time constraints. Roman, Maxwell, thank you. Personal life, yeah, there can be things going on in life that can cause issues there. Expectations too high, good, thanks, Dave. Assuming the basic knowledge is understood, thank you, Kerry. The student's mind is elsewhere, or appointments coming. Again, plagiarism, yep. A student becoming defensive, conflict can be a part of it too, thanks, Rob. Low blood sugar, yeah, it could be a physiological thing, absolutely. I didn't think of that one either. Student rushing off. Okay, there's way more here than I can keep up with, but have a look at the chat because these points are really good to be aware of, to think of in your own mind of what might be affecting you so that you can maybe catch them before they seep out into the feedback. So these are some common ones that I see that you've all mentioned, I think. You're in a bad mood, you dislike the student, you're frustrated with them. Some ones that you probably mentioned in the chat, but this one can pop up a little bit. It requires a little bit of soul searching, this one, but people pleasing and wanting to be liked. So sometimes often teachers, they sort of get this feeling like, oh, I want my students to like me. I want to be liked. I want to be the cool teacher. And if I give someone feedback that they don't like, then I'll be liked less. There might be fear of getting bad course feedback. If that's part of someone's employment or performance management is, you must get this much, this much percentage positive feedback from your students. There could be some fear of that could start to seep into the necessity to give constructive feedback. There's a few mentions of the tired and over it, your 37th assessment for the day, lack of time. This second last point there, wanting to paint a positive picture for audit, validation, or personal performance. So sometimes we have in the back of our mind that, oh, we're actually under pretty heavy regulation and regulatory scrutiny in VET. Is this the assessment that gets pulled by the auditor from ASQA? And you want it to paint a picture that it was a really great assessment, but maybe it wasn't so good. And then funding pressures, that's an interesting one. I hear that one kind of, I hear it kind of mentioned in hallways and around the water cooler a little bit at various places that I go to, but no one really wants to acknowledge it or put it in writing. But, the manager of the RTO is saying, hey, look, if you don't pass these 20 students, we're not going to get funding. We're not going to get government funding for these guys. So I need you to pass them. And if you don't, then there won't be a course to run next time and you won't have a job, sort of thing. So that can really, I think, weigh hard on people's minds as well. And so if you have that pressure, oh God, I've got to pass all these students and their performance is not great, then you might find yourself giving all this sort of extra positive sounding feedback to kind of fluff it up and make it look like the performance was a lot better than what it really was. So that's something to watch out for. Yeah, I'm glad there's some plus ones for the people pleasing and wanting to be liked. I really struggled with that in my early days of teaching. I really did. I hated. I just didn't know how to give constructive feedback. So I had to look at these models and these strategies and practice and over and over and over. Yeah, really good. Okay, so that's a common threat, isn't it, Denise? That last one is funding pressures. All right, so that's it for today. I think we've covered some really important ground for feedback. What we talked about were some poor examples. We started that session off with some sort of almost comical examples, but they were comical, but yeah, I've seen them, they really do happen. So it's something to watch out for. But I think looking at the way the chat flooded through on those poor examples, I'm pretty confident that none of you are doing that, which is awesome. We explored some feedback models like the praise, improvement, praise model, the STAR model, Pendleton's. There's a few others in there. Some of them come from, management and performance and people and culture and that sort of stuff. But they could be adopted if you're looking for something or you just want to read wider on the topic. We looked at the importance of understanding why we give feedback and the outcome that we want to get from the feedback, because that will drive the way we deliver it and the types of wording and language that we use or the strategies we use. We explored the general principles. So regardless of what methods you're using, some general things to use. So if you're starting to move beyond having a structure like the feedback sandwich and you want something just, what are my good principles that I can work towards? Then we explored those. We explored some ways to deliver it and some examples, some more positive examples. And then finally, we finished off by exploring the biases and possible negative influences to be aware of. So that's the end of our session today. Thank you so much for your time and attendance.